Well, thanks everyone for coming today to talk about APIs in healthcare. Joining us today is the NexHealth team, and super excited to be chatting about how you started your API program. So I think first question is, what actually got you excited about launching an API platform, given that you started off in the SaaS space?
Yeah, good question. Hi everyone, my name is Waleed. I think the vision from day one was always like doctors, developers, and patients. Like when we first started the company, there was no platform for you as a patient to go, message your doctor, book an appointment, transfer medical records from one doctor. There's nothing like that out there, right? So our vision was like, how can we build the platform to do that for you to transfer medical records with a tap of a button?
Bluetooth disconnected.
Who's that? And yeah.
Alright. Yeah, my name's Alex. I'm an engineer at NexHealth. Actually, I work on our API. So, I started in like 2019. That's pretty much when the API got started. Really, we were finding that there was a lot of interest, right? Like, it's really hard to create and maintain integrations with all these really antiquated legacy systems, especially the ones sitting in a doctor's office, right? How do you get access to them? How do you, maintain reliability? And so that's a really hard problem to solve. And there's a lot of people looking to work with your healthcare data that need that problem solved. And so after the SaaS product was built, right, we now had the solution to that problem for several of these EHRs. And so there became, the use case and the driver for creating or exposing that data for third-party developers.
And speaking about this, is electronic health records and healthcare data, does that make it more challenging trying to expose, this data, or is there some certain precautions you have to take, and how does that differ versus, like, say, a consumer app?
I think from the beginning, really just staying HIPAA compliant and maintaining good security practices were kind of like on our mind. We knew that any of the data flowing through our systems is very sensitive. That's definitely a high priority for us. I think when it came to integrating with Moesif, I do remember actually looking at a Moesif blog post about how to make sure that the stuff you're sending is HIPAA compliant. So, I actually referenced that. So.
And then what are some of the big challenges you've seen, launching an API platform now that you've gone through it versus, say, launching a traditional SaaS company? Anything that was surprising or something that was unexpected?
I think first of all, right, your customers are completely different. Your customers are developers. They know what they want. They usually have a lot higher standards. I think a lot of times with the SaaS product selling direct to consumers, you very much push like, okay, we can do this for you, and the sale is a lot simpler. With a developer product, the sale can be very complex. You have to, you need to kind of build trust. They come in, they're not only looking for, okay, can you do what we want you to do and what we need you to do, but can you do it reliably, right? Because we are building our entire business on your API. And so it becomes very important that we build that trust early, and they see that you provide good support, and that you're very careful with their data.
I think that's a really great point, which is around trust. If I'm going to purchase a new tool or API, I'm going to look at what type of security practices they have, or are they reliable, right? And see, is this something I can depend on for the next few years? Very different than maybe a consumer app. But just taking a step back, I'd love to hear about the founding story, maybe of NexHealth, and how you got started and why you got started with the healthcare space.
Yeah, so we got started. My co-founder, he was becoming a doctor. He was doing pre-med. He worked at a doctor's office. That's how he found out about the problems in healthcare. I was doing computer science. I just wanted to build something. That's really all I really cared about. And when he brought the vision of there's no platform for doctors and patients to connect to, that really spoke to me because I had that same problem. Like there's no way for me to transfer medical records from one doctor to another doctor, right? So I just knew that there was a huge opportunity in this space, right? Like right now, if you go to a doctor, you have no way to, if you go to a new doctor, they have no context as to who you are as a patient, right? Because they have no medical history. They don't know your past history. They don't know your labs and your allergy information, your medical history, right? So that was just top of mind to me. Like, how can we solve that problem? Yeah.
Awesome. And I heard, Alex, that you joined to start the API program. You're number one, trying to create all these different initiatives. We'd love to hear from you. What is it like to be on the ground floor, looking at different tools and integrating Moesif?
Yeah, when I first started, it was kind of pitched to me, hey, we're launching an API product, and essentially we need somebody to just kind of have at it, right? So I actually started with customer conversations, talking to potential developers, and figuring out their needs, and then also figuring out how to provide access to our data to meet those needs. From the ground floor, it was I think with any API that's just been created, you have no usage data. You don't know how your customer is going to use it, so you have to make a bunch of guesses. You build endpoints, and you're like, I think this would be a good way of accessing this, and I think you should also have access to this associated data, but you don't really know until your customers start using it. And sometimes, if you don't have a good versioning strategy, right, you kind of get stuck with decisions you made. Since I was on the ground floor, I'm definitely haunted sometimes by some of the decisions that were made, but working on making those better every day.
And that's a good point around versioning. And speaking of different decisions, we've seen from a lot of our customers that you have both a SaaS product and an API product at the same time. How is that structured, and how do you balance the needs between the SaaS product versus the API product, and how do you decide whether is this common for both, or are these two different development life cycles or products that you're pushing out? Who wants to take this question?
So we typically develop for both our SaaS product users and our API users, but going forward, long-term vision is going to be focused more on the API and have people build on our API as opposed to actually building the features in our SaaS product, right? And then allowing other developers to build using the data that we extract from the EHR systems. So things like diabetes management, or running AI bots on like lung cancer records and things like that, right? For lung cancer patients and things like that, right? So in the short term, build more SaaS features, but also support the API features, and then long term support as extracting as much data out of the EHR as possible, exporting that in our API, and then allowing other people to build on the API and then build cool things, basically.
I think just from lessons learned, right? I think there's a pretty common issue I've definitely heard from many startups or just companies at large, is that a lot of APIs, especially backend APIs, are a bit tightly coupled to their presentation layer, and our internal API had similar issues, and so just moving forward, our thinking really is that we want to design our API from the developer experience first, or what is it like to use it as a developer user, and then so build it from that mindset first, interface first, and then implementation details afterwards.
And that's a really good point around thinking about the developer user versus the end user. Those support processes is quite different, right? Developers quite technical, and end users looking for to fix their use case or solve the use case. How do you manage those support processes? Does it get routed differently? Is it engineering, or is it someone else that actually looks at those tickets? And what's the process like to make sure you have the best possible developer experience?
Yes, you do a lot of support.
I definitely did a lot of support when we got started. Especially when it was a nascent product. The feedback really needs to go directly to the engineer. So I think that's very important. I think right now, as we've gotten larger and we have a much larger volume of support requests, it hasn't become feasible for me to have my fingers in everything. I've become a bottleneck. So I really wish that. So we have a good support team. Counter over here forwards me a lot of issues. People who know the product, people who know the systems and how they interact is vital. You can't just have any normal support team. They need to really be able to contextualize the issues before they forward it to you, because I think there's a lot of times where it's not really an issue with your system. It's sometimes an issue with their integration, and so that context has to be figured out before it lands in engineering's lab.
And Alex, is there any best practices you've seen, working with developer customers, what to do or what not to do? And this might be helpful for anyone starting a, API first program.
That's kind of a tough open-ended question. Let's see. I think number one is if you're a developer looking to. I'm sorry. So is this like a question from the developer side or from the API first product side?
Let's say developer first.
From the developer. So like when you're looking to integrate with an API, right? You really need to throw out all your assumptions. You're really you're kind of putting yourself at the mercy of that API, right? Like, and so the things you deliver have to have to be supported by that API from the beginning to the end. So you really can't make assumptions about what it's going to do later on, and so on and so forth. So I would say that's number one. Number two is have a very strong support relationship. Make good friends with the people who are supporting your development as you go into it. You really foster that point of contact. I think that'll cover it.
And earlier, Alex, you spoke on deprecating different features and different fields. Have you ever had to remove a field that a customer was relying on? And what is the best process to handle that in a delicate way so that you don't piss off a customer?
That hits home for sure. Let's see. So I think number one, what we do is just go gather data. Honestly, the process for us internally for just figuring out who's using it, how often are they using it, how important it is, we honestly just go look at our Moesif logs. And that's not just because we're here. That's the truth. So we need to figure out just how important it is before we even make a decision about, is this something we're going to deprecate? Because let's say it's a small use case and a few of your customers are using it, and not very often. Very often you can just lean on your relationship with them, contact them like, hey, this change is coming. We'd like you to move to this approach instead, and here are our reasons why, and you can kind of navigate it smoothly that way. But otherwise, if it's not something you can convince your developers to put the resources in to change, you just have to revert it, and that's it.
Now, changing gears a little bit, you've both gone through lots of different purchasing decisions. Alex, you're looking at Moesif and that integration process. What are some key things that you look for when deciding to purchase an API product or developer tool? And what are some things that you've learned along the ways that maybe you didn't realize beforehand?
When it comes to using like third-party APIs, I think for sure I think about the whole setup process, because a lot of times if you're going to integrate with an API, you expect, or right, the intention is that you want to fully automate everything, right? You don't want any manual work. And so you need to make sure that your whole workflow is supported by that API from start to finish. So I think that's the first thing I look for. I suppose besides the base functionality, right? So there's base functionality, and you shop for that. But then when it comes down to deciding, it's ensuring you have that full cycle kind of experience when it comes to authentication, using it, setup, like configuration, and then actually using in production.
And is there a threshold when you decide whether to just build it versus buy it from another vendor? And what is that decision making process like? And how do you decide build versus buy?
That's a tough one. I think it sort of just comes down to is it a bigger investment for us to spend time not focusing on our core features and our vision? I think for us as a general principle, we follow like it's better to spend more money than working on something that's not going to contribute to our vision. So that's sort of like the way that we look at it, right? And Moesif was a great example of that, right? Like we don't want to build that in house or try to flex Datadog into making it work the way we want it to work. So yeah, that's a good example of that.
And going back to services and API products, what about an open source tool? How do you do diligence on an open source tool that might not have a company behind it? And what are the key things you're looking for before you decide to use this open source tool versus maybe build it internally?
That's a tough one because I made the huge mistake of using an open source library that ended up creating a bunch of multi-tenancy in our database that we didn't really need. So we're going through a huge migration process right now. But yeah, like Alex said, it comes down to like first principle thinking, like really thinking long term. Like, what is this? If you scale this up to 10,000, 100,000 customers, what is that going to look like? I think that's like one of the key things that everyone really needs to look at, like looking long term. How will this scale, right? What are the trade-offs with this decision? Is it is it the hype right now, or is this like actually going to solve the problem at hand, right, and at scale? Generally, that's what I look at.
So when you think about a new feature and you're going to release on the API, what does that like end-to-end process look like in terms of designing the feature? Is it design the API spec first, or do you actually design the feature first? And then what does that like QA and release lifecycle look like?
It first really just comes from user research. So we kind of think up, this feature sounds like it would produce value. We can imagine these use cases, but that's us. We're not, we're not actually going to be doing that. We would reach out to our development partners, talk to their product people as well, see if that would appeal to them. Once there's really like value backing this decision to pursue that work, we design it first from the interface, from the endpoint itself, and go, okay, this is how it should be interacted with, and backend models and everything else aside, this is how we want it to be worked with, and then we'll handle all the translation to obfuscate the small details on our side. Once that feature's kind of once we've got that figured out, we code it, and we usually push it or announce it to some beta customers, especially those partners that are interested in the feature, and we let it bake for a little bit, and then then we do kind of a wire release.
And during this release cycle, is there certain metrics you're looking for before you roll it out to 100% of your user base? And what are some key KPIs? If you're able to share any of those, not the actual metrics, but just the type of metrics you're tracking.
Yeah, I mean, it'd mostly be, so we'd be tracking adoption, right? Like, just because we're like, hey, we built this because you said it might be useful. Are you actually using it? Because there's a lot of companies that get really excited. You tell them there's a feature, there's a function, and they get very, very excited, and then they don't use it. So that happens. So we definitely track adoption. We also track endpoint performance as well as instances of 400 errors, right? How common is it for a developer to be reading your documentation and then still getting 400 errors?
And documentation, that brings up a really interesting topic. Very hard thing to sometimes solve, especially for these API first products or developer first. Can you share some best practices you've seen from documentation, and what actually enables developers to get integrated as quick as possible or get started with the API as quick as possible?
Alex wrote our documentation, so.
Oh boy. I think one of the biggest lessons I learned when writing our documentation is that at least the API reference, just keep it in lockstep with your code. So at least what we do is we auto generate our docs straight from our code using a DSL, and so there's just never any discrepancy between what a developer is reading and what's actually occurring. I would say that's the number one thing I learned.
And besides the API itself, how do you keep the rest of the docs up to date? I mean, what if you release a new feature, a new redesign? We've even found this out ourselves that we just did a redesign in January and required a lot of updates at the same time.
Let's see. Let's see. So, yeah, honestly, I think a lot of that is really owned from the product side, though. So, whereas the code and the reference docs, in our case, is owned by engineering. A lot of the guides and feature release notes and change logs, those are from product. So, you just have a really, I guess, disciplined release process and good communication in your team, just to make sure product can you're communicating with your product team so that they can write those and update those.
Awesome. Switching gears a little bit, we'd love to hear a little bit more around founding a company, going through a fundraise process, and especially in the SaaS space. What are investors looking for, especially for anyone that's thinking about starting their own company?
That's a tough one. I mean, investors are looking for growth at the end of the day, right? That's what they're a big market to sell into, and the growth of a company. That's what they're looking for. We have a mutual investor in Adam, so I guess that's what he was looking for. But yeah, just if you can find the biggest market to sell into, that's what you should go for. The smaller the market, the less likely you're going to get invested in. And something that's sticky, right? Something that can really stick around and is not easy to compete against, right? So like building your moat, the concept of a moat is very important, right? When building a new product, if you can show you have a strong moat where it's hard to penetrate, competitors can't penetrate that moat. Investors like that, right? They want to see something sticky like that. And then fast growth, obviously, if they see exponential growth, then that's obviously going to be a plus, right? Those are good indicators of a company that will sustain itself, right? And then on top of that, the people in the company they're going to trust you, right? The fact that they trusted, Adam trusted you in your second company, right? So that's a big thing too. The people is going to be the biggest thing as well. Do the founders think of first principles? Are they bought in? Are they, do they love what they do? Do they think night and day about what they do, right? That's also really important. And have they really thought about the customer? Have they really thought about the end customer? And do they care about the customers, right? From what I've seen, that's what investors really care about, right?
And how do those different challenges compare versus, during the seed stage or angel stage? Now NexHealth is beyond 100 plus employees, I've heard. What are the key challenges now, and how does that differ versus the seed stage?
Yeah, in the seed stage, you're looking for people that are willing to take a bet on you, right? And you might not have much traction. You might have a few customers. You just got to show that you have a few customers at least that you have a working product. Once you have that, at the Series A or Series B or Series C stage, you really just have to show like compounding growth, right? Especially if you're in a SaaS business, like for us, we're a SaaS business. If you can show that your growth is increasing month over month, and you're not churning customers left and right, you're below industry benchmark for churn, for example. Those things matter a lot as you keep it growing, right? And as you go into like Series C, Series D, and all these things, like the due diligence gets harder and harder. Investors will actually talk to your customers, right? They'll actually go out to your customers and find out, hey, how's NexHealth doing, right? They have a whole team of people who do like investigation, like who is this person, who is their leadership, right? It gets pretty tough, right? They might question everything on your books too. So, but at the end of the day, if you have growth, like all that really doesn't matter, right? And if you have a good leadership team and you have growth, then yeah, that's what you're really looking for. Question?
I think since about growth, I was wondering how much of growth these days come from your API platform versus your SaaS? How much of your growth is driven by the API versus your typical SaaS product? And the one thing to follow on just to also is want to understand how the monetization of API platform compared to SaaS, how that contributes also.
Yeah.
And if you look at so it's actually three questions. So finally is that when you look at the API, how to monetize the APIs, what business models do you look at compared to how they differ than SaaS business models?
Yeah.
That's three.
So right now we have less than 1/10 of our business, our recurring revenue is from API customers. And we were able to recognize that with Moesif, thank you. So before Moesif, we had no idea like who was using our platform, who wasn't. And we couldn't even bill our customers until we got Moesif in place. So thank you all. And for your second question, sorry, what was your second question?
So how much do you see of, I guess you said 1% of revenue comes from like API right now. So do you see that has a future big driver of your revenue? Because assuming 1%, assuming hopefully in the future be 20%, 30%, do you see be big driver revenue compared to SaaS?
Yeah.
Or do you see more big driver than SaaS even?
Yeah, definitely. Like the API will definitely be a bigger driver of revenue long term, because basically we have a bigger market to sell to. It's not just going to be doctors, it's going to be patients as well, it's going to be consumers, it's going to be people in labs and pharmacy and anyone that needs access to healthcare data. That's our market basically, right? So that's going to be huge, right?
Is it bigger than the SaaS product?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Because we're not only selling to doctors, we're selling to people that want to build healthcare apps, basically, right? So anyone that wants to build a diabetes management app, right? They're going to be using NexHealth to access the EHR data, or someone that wants to read and write data into ledgers, payment ledgers in the EHR system, maybe to determine, what is the cost of my visit before I actually go to the doctor, right? That's a big problem right now. Like, you as a patient don't know how much it's going to cost to go to a doctor, right? Before you book an appointment. But if you had the data in the EHR, you could predict that data, right? So things like that, like you're going to have people build healthcare apps on top of our API, and that just really opens up almost every opportunity possible, right, in healthcare. So yeah, definitely the API is going to be the biggest driver of our revenue long term. The SaaS product is what's going to get us what's getting our foot in the door of all these practices. We get that data, and then
Oh, that's an interesting perspective.
Yeah.
But one question I have is that how business model different for SaaS versus API products? And then when you look at different business models for API products, how do you think about it? How do you decide how to pick a business model for API products? And how do you even pick one, I guess?
Yeah. So we're actually still trying to figure out what our business model is for the API, like how exactly do we sell and package everything. In terms of pricing, like we have two separate pricing packages right now. One we're actually doing request-based, which is thanks to you guys we can do that. But then long term for the business model, I think we're going to have like a sales team for API. We're going to have a customer success team for API, and a whole team of engineers and product people just for the API, right? And establish partnerships with a lot of different companies, right? We're gonna have an app store. That's gonna be the biggest thing. We're gonna have an app store where people we actually have a version of this right now. You can go on marketplace.nexhealth.com to see our like beta test, basically, to see like, is this gonna work? We basically put 9 apps on that website, and it's not an actual app store where you can go and click install, but that's going to be the future of it, where people will be able to install apps that they want to use, right? Doctors can install apps, and patients can install apps like, hey, I want to link this, have this app access my EHR data, right? My medical records, basically. That's going to be the long-term play. Like the app store is going to be our business model, basically. Yeah.
And that brings up a good point, which is, different ways to monetize an API. And, taking a step back, how do you decide, should this API be for free, or should it be something that you're going to do a per request basis or something like that, or maybe something else? And do you go through that analysis, and how did you come up with, the current model that you have, and where would that go?
We're still figuring that out. Yeah, that's the best way to put it. It's pricing is always hard, right? Maybe we'll have a freemium model. I don't know, right? That's something that we'll figure it out this year. It's a goal for this year, I would say. Yeah, pricing is always hard to figure out. Yeah.
Indeed. Any other questions from the room? Larry has one. Go ahead.
I got a question. So you integrate with many different EHRs, but there's only one that is the gorilla, Epic. What is your perspective on all of the secondary players? Like you say you're going to beef up engineering to integrate these other EHRs, but if there's only one gorilla, is that all you need to support?
Yeah, good question. So there is a gorilla in the hospital space. That's that's what we call enterprise, I guess. Below enterprise, below hospitals, there's a bunch of other organizations that might own a bunch of locations all around, in a certain area, a region, maybe all over the country. And then at the lowest level, you have your mom and pop shop, your SMBs, basically, which is a majority of the segment, the customer segment, right? Your mom and pop shops, and that's where you have the longest tail of all of the EHRs that are out there, right? There's like thousands, maybe 1,000 or more, maybe 2,000, right, of EHR systems that are out there, and there's no one big player in the SMB or mid-market space. So in the hospital space, maybe you have 2 major players: Epic, Cerner, Allscripts, right? But below that, it's very fragmented, right? There's a ton of players. Yeah, your data is going to be all over the place. It's not just in Epic, right? Even Kaiser Permanente, I think they have multiple EHRs, not just one, right? So yeah, going after just one EHR is not going to solve the problem, right? Apple Health actually integrates with some hospital systems, and I think they do an integration with Epic. But then if you go, to your normal doctor, they're not going to have your data is not going to be available in Apple Health, right? Because they only integrate with that one software. Whereas we're going from the bottom up, we're integrating with each EHR that is going to be out there, right? Or at least majority of them. So it's like a different approach, bottoms up versus top down. Yeah. Did I answer your question?
Yeah. Just like Shin, I have many questions.
Go ahead, Larry.
My next one was, can you describe your ideal customer for your API product? Like what's their size? Are you elephant hunting? Are you whale hunting? How many developers do they have? And what do they want from the API? What are they looking for from the EHR?
Yeah, I mean, we're looking for the whales. Obviously, we want more money, right? We all want more money. We have some customers like that right now. We're working with Smile Direct Club. If you guys are aware of them, they do the aligners. They're sort of a whale, right? We consider them a whale. There's another company that does, there's a SaaS product called Swell that we work with. I consider them a whale, right? They bring on a lot of locations for us. So yeah, like that is our ideal customer. Anyone that's big that wants to scale fast. Small Direct Club wants to scale fast. They want to roll this out fast to all their locations. They have maybe 5,000 locations plus, I think, all over America, maybe more than that, SDC. And we've only gotten started with them, right? Yeah, ideal customer is one that has a lot of market share, I would say. Yeah, more money.
And what do they pull out? What do they pull out of your API? What do they want from the EHR?
Typically, scheduling, like patient demographic information, basic patient information, and then scheduling is another one, and then appointment follow-ups, knowing like when the appointment was, so that they could follow up with like a review, or in the case of Smile Direct Club, their use case is actually to offer booking on their website for patients that are looking for a consultation for aligners, and when you go on that website and you book a time with a doctor, if that doctor is if that doctor signed up with NexHealth, and or if Smile Direct Club set them up with our integration, then that appointment will be inserted into the EHR that the doctor uses, right? So it's all integrated. It's not like a separate system the doctor has to deal with. The doctor is going to see that appointment go straight into their EHR system. So that's the value prop for the doctor. Is like free revenue for the doctor. They just sit there and the appointment just comes in, right? And they just have to see the patient. And then for Smile Direct Club, it's just easy booking, right? They use our API for the scheduling part. Anything I missed?
I'd just like to add that, like for me personally, I think I get excited whenever a potential customer shows up who has a really interesting use case. So yeah, I mean, like Smile Direct Club, one of the big reasons they use this is because they found that they have a higher rate of success, a lot less refunds when you actually visited a dentist before you get your aligners. And so that's the big use case for booking appointments via our API. But then we also have a lot of smaller startups who are doing really exciting things. There's a really small one called Snap Smile. You use your mobile phone to take a picture of your mouth. It uses some kind of algorithm to figure out if you might have periodontal disease or there might be a cavity. And if it does detect that, then they're like, hey, you should go see a dentist. So they, a booking flow shows up and they book via our API. So just for me personally, it's the exciting pieces, it's the things that you never even thought of. And I think that's what's exciting about APIs is it's those use cases you've never even dreamed of that just show up because you exist. Couldn't do it without us.
Yeah, another example is a company called Referralwell. They're in the medical space. They realized that they get the most conversions for referrals. When you get referred to a specialist, they get the most conversions when they book that appointment right when the patient's in the chair. So they're using our API to get the appointment information and the patient information to do that, right? So there's tons of use cases for the API. It's almost unlimited, right? And we're just getting started. We only pull basic patient information, and scheduling information. There's so much more data in these EHRs that we don't pull yet, related to insurance, billing, labs, imaging, medical history, allergies, all this stuff that we're just getting started with reading and writing into. So the opportunities are huge.
Definitely a lot of opportunities in APIs. I guess just to close out, anything you want to add in terms of starting an API business or launching an API business?
Use Moesif.
I mean, I don't really have anything to add. It's like I think there's just a lot of lessons to learn. But if you I think there's a lot of really good examples out there of high quality first class APIs. So definitely take inspiration from them.
Last question.
Go ahead, Praveen.
Who are your competitors and how do you differentiate yourself?
We don't have any direct competitors. We have competitors to features, I would say. Like for our SaaS product, we offer online scheduling, messaging, waitlist features, payments, things like that. We might have competitors to those features, but not as a platform, right? And on the API side, there's like no competitor, basically. There's maybe one competitor that tried to do it, and everybody that's using us now has already used them, and they're migrating from them to us. So, yeah, it's a hard problem to solve. Like integrating with the EHRs is basically the EHRs are against us in a way. They want to keep the data siloed and on their platform because if the data is opened up, then they lose business, right? The ability to use a different EHR opens up. So they want to keep that data inside their EHR system. So we're sort of going up against the EHR systems, and the doctors want us to integrate with the EHR, but the EHR system might not want us to access the data, right? So we have the doctors on our side. That's why we're succeeding, right? And as long as we're keeping the doctors and the patients happy, then the EHR companies will have to comply. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Oh, go ahead, Larry.
I've got one final question. So you obviously pull very sensitive patient information over the API. How do you ensure security of that data?
We use a HIPAA compliant platform, Aptable. That's for our infrastructure. We're in the process of migrating to AWS and making sure that that's going to be HIPAA compliant. And then alongside that, you have policies in the company on like who can access what data. Don't share information on email, things like that. Right? We use the third-party platforms we use. We signed a BAA with them, and it mostly really just comes down to like the culture in the company. Like, do people actually make sure that they use the right tools when sharing sensitive data, right? And then just making sure you don't provide access to people that don't need it, right? In cases like sales and marketing shouldn't really have access to patient data, things like that, right? So only on like as needed basis you should provide that data. So yeah, just follow industry best practices, I would say. Yeah.
Awesome. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much, everyone, for coming, and thank you, NexHealth, for giving us a whole spiel around APIs in healthcare.
Yeah. Thank you.